just over a year ago, I was in Corner Brook, Newfoundland at General Council. And on the Wednesday of General Council week, we had an opportunity to sort of have an afternoon off, and they had planned all kinds of different activities you could sign up for. And I had never zip-lined. So I signed up for the zip line because that sounded super cool and a little terrifying. And the deal was, it was a zip line and ropes course. And I've been to summer camp, so I know all about ropes courses. You know, they're like these ropes that are 5, maybe 6 feet off the ground, and you kind of have to balance your way across them. And if you fall off, you get back on. That's a ropes course. But zip lining, that's something altogether different. So I zip lined for the first time in my life. Terrifying, screamed the whole way, wah, but awesome. And then I thought, well, after that, the ropes course is going to be a little bit of a letdown, but we had some time. So I went over to where the ropes course was, and it turns out it wasn't exactly like the one I remember from summer camp. See, this was a 3-level ropes course, and the first level started at 20 feet off the ground. It's about maybe the height of the balcony, maybe a bit higher than that. And then the second level was 40-some feet off the ground. And the third level is 63 feet off the ground. That might not sound like a lot of feet to you, but when you are 63 feet off the ground, you might as well be a mile above the ground. Because if you fall from 63 feet, better you should have fallen from a mile. So they put us in these little harnesses that have these 2 clips on them. And before they even let you on this ropes course, they clip the 2 clips onto an overhead cable. And it's important that you've got 2. Because as you move from one challenge to the next, you have to like clip onto a new cable. And so the way you do that is you unclip one clip, so this one's still attached. This one clips on to the new one, and you can't even unclip this one till this one clips on. And then you clip this, and then you carry on. Now, the thing about that overhead cable is you can fall off of the challenge that you're on and be suspended. You cannot plummet to the ground because you're clipped into that overhead cable. You can fail, but you cannot die. It's an important feature. I probably should have started by telling you I'm terrified of heights. So I get up to the 20-foot thing, and you have to zip line, a very short little zip line, onto the challenge. And I think they do that so that you can't chicken out. Because once you zip line over, the only way to get down now is to go through the entire course, and it's about 8 challenges per level. And then you zip line out at the far end. You can't go back up a zip line. I won't torture you with the whole story, but suffice it to say, it's the scariest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And so I get through the first level, and I'm like, okay, well, I totally managed that. It was scary, but I did it. So I climb up to the second level, zip line over to the first challenge, and immediately become aware there's no way. No way I can even get through the first challenge, never mind the next few. So shaking uncontrollably, I very slowly make my way through challenge after challenge until I finish the second one, and now I'm done. And I'm like, I made it through 2/3 of the rope course, and I'm feeling pretty good. And then one of the youth says to me, so you're going to do level 3? And I'm like, no. And he says, well, I'm doing level 3. I'm like, well, good for you. And he says, well, why not? And I said, because I'm scared, really scared. And he said, oh. And he walked away. He wasn't actually going to pressure me. But then I thought about what I was saying. And I was thinking about what we were doing at General Council and how we were talking about this comprehensive review process. And a number of people were saying, we don't know what this will mean. We're really scared about all the changes that are going on in the church, and we just want to put the brakes on. And I thought, it's okay to be scared. But if I want to encourage our church to have courage to face that fear, then I guess I got to go up to level 3. So I climbed the ladder and I got up to level 3 and I thought, I hate this. Anyway, I get out there and there were times when I was so completely paralyzed by fear that I just had to stop and just hang on to the rope that I was on halfway through a challenge and just catch my breath and say a prayer, and that's when I would remember that I was clipped in. I'd be like, right, I can fail, but I cannot die out here. And then I would look back behind me and I'd see what I'd already done. All these challenges I'd made it through that I was quite certain at the time there was no way that I could do them, but I had done them. I had gotten to here by getting through all of them. And then I would look ahead and I'd say, it's really scary, but it's no scarier than that. So I guess I can do this. And sometimes the only way to get from where I was to the next place I needed to be was to just totally rely on the fact that I was clipped in and just lean, like hang on to the harness that was clipped to the overhead cable and just rely entirely on it while I stepped out into space and hope that my foot landed on the next solid thing. I tell you that because when I hear Matthew's story of Jesus and Peter on the water, I'm reminded of it. See, now what's just happened is that Jesus and the disciples have just shared a meal with about 4,000 people on a hillside. And Jesus managed to feed those 4,000 people with just a few loaves and fish. Y'all know that story. And Jesus is just cleaning up after dinner. And he says to the disciples, you go on ahead while I clean up and send everybody home, and I'll catch up with you. And we're going across the lake to the other side. I'll meet you over there. So the disciples, they go out in a boat, and obviously they're in that boat all night, and they've made it partway across the lake. But now a wind has come up, and they can't get any further. They're just stuck in the middle of the lake, in the middle of a storm. Jesus, meanwhile, has sent everybody home. He's cleaned up the hillside, picked up all the napkins, recycled them, and he sat down, and he's had a time of prayer to kind of recenter himself. And the sun is just about to come up, and he looks out over the water, and there they are, the disciples in the middle of the lake, completely just suspended in time, like they're just not moving. So he does what any good Messiah would do, and he walks out across the lake towards the people. Right, and we all kind of like, you can't walk on water. Right, like you know that. You and I both know. Disciples, everybody knows, everyone it seems, but Jesus knows that you can't walk on water. But we are inclined to suspend our disbelief for Jesus' sake, because he did, after all, just feed thousands of people with not nearly enough food. So we kind of get that Jesus can do these sorts of things, even though we know, the rest of us, So Jesus comes walking out across the water, and the disciples, seeing somebody walking on the water in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, quite reasonably freak out. It's obviously a ghost, and they're having their fits in the boat. And Jesus says, yo, chill. It's me. It's okay. And Peter, now, I love Peter, because Peter is the first guy to follow Jesus. Like when Jesus says, hey, Peter, come with me, he's like, you bet! And he just drops everything and he follows Jesus. He's totally like Jesus guy, right? Yes, I'm with you, Jesus. And he has some great moments. He has some really great moments where he like gets it when nobody else is getting it. But God love him. Peter manages to fall on his face more spectacularly than any of the other disciples on a fairly regular basis. Right? It's Peter who says to Jesus, don't tell everybody you're going to die. We don't want to hear that. That's bad news. And Jesus has to say to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Not a great day for Peter. And Peter's also the guy who, even though he really wants to be with Jesus, like he just really wants to be a faithful disciple of Jesus, completely loses his nerve after Jesus is arrested, and in fact denies even knowing the guy 3 times. I love Peter because he sets up a standard, as it were, for discipleship that I feel like I might be able to live up to. Peter sees Jesus out on the water, and he says, Jesus, if that is you out there, then tell me to come to you. Tell me, here in this boat, on the water, on the only thing that floats, on the water in a storm, not, Jesus, get in the boat for crying out loud, but tell me to get out of this boat and come to you. Because Peter understands not much, but this much, that he needs to be wherever it is that Jesus is. He needs to respond to Jesus' call to him. It's not about getting Jesus to come where he is, but to go where Jesus is, which is what he's been doing now for about 3 years, is just trying to follow Jesus into all the crazy places Jesus goes, which almost always are way beyond his comfort zone. And now Jesus is out on the water in the middle of a storm saying, all right, come on. What happens? Peter gets out of the boat, and what happens? He walks on water. First thing he does, he gets out of the boat, and Matthew tells us, and he began to walk on the water towards Jesus. We often skip that part because it's so completely unreasonable. People can't walk on water. Everybody knows that. Except that Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. Then he noticed the waves, and then he noticed the wind, and then he panicked, and then he starts to sink. But Peter was clipped in, and he knew it. So when he's going down, he cries out, and he says, Jesus, I'm going down. And we're told without hesitation, Jesus reaches out and lifts him back up. We can fail. Peter, Lord knows, Peter can fail. But Jesus never allows him to drown in his failures. He always has them. And he says, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt that you could do the impossible? Because you did the impossible. Well, friends, there's an awful lot of times in our life as individuals, and certainly as a church, where it feels like God is inviting us to do the absolute impossible. To step outside of the boat, whatever the boat is. The boat might be the self-image that has carried you this far in life. The understanding of who you are, what you can do, what you're called to be, whatever it is, that has got you this far. It's a good boat. But when that boat is no longer able to carry you where you need to go, Jesus is saying, well, get on out of the boat. Maybe the boat is a particular understanding of what church looks like for us, how you do church, what it's supposed to be like, how it's supposed to be structured and organized, because it's worked. It's worked for 90-some years. It's a good boat. But when that boat is no longer able to make it through the storms of the present, and Jesus is out there in the storm, and that's the thing about Jesus. He's forever doing that kind of thing. You want Jesus in the boat with you. That's where he belongs. The problem is, He's very often outside of the boat, in the storm, saying, hey, over here, this is where you need to be. And the only way to get there is to get out of the boat, which is a very risky prospect because people sink in water, especially in a storm. Now, of course, you don't go on a ropes course unless you're clipped in, and you don't step out of a boat onto the water unless you're clipped in to God. When you're clipped in, and you know what you need to do, I hope, to clip in. Maybe we need to practice that as a church, what it is we need to do so that we know that we're not relying on ourselves and our ability to walk on waters or tight ropes or whatever. That's not a good thing to rely on. But when we know that we are entirely reliant on God's grace, God's strength to hold us up, God's willingness to allow us to fail but never to allow us to drown in our failures, that even when we fail, Jesus has us and will lift us back up and stick us back on and say, all right, now carry on. When we know that, then we can step out of the boat. Then we can follow Jesus into the storm, whatever that storm might be. The storm of your life, the storm of the changes in the church, the storm of all the garbage going on in the world. When we're clipped in, when Jesus is out there, then may God grant us the courage and the wisdom and the humility to clip in and to step out and to discover that just maybe by the grace of God, you can walk on water. Amen.